This is a walkthrough of the procedural building generator. First things first, we want to open up the blueprints folder and drag out the blueprint. Let's center that out and make sure you have pressed G to enable the gizmo so you can see the grid. The first thing we're going to look at is the settings, and let's talk about single building later, but visualize grid. We'll visualize the grid which is driving the generation. It allows you to more easily see the shape and how many grid points are in the grid. So we turn that off, it will hide it. This can increase performance a lot. Or you could just press G to hide the whole thing and that will up your FPS like crazy. The allowed attempt generator is how many attempts the algorithm has to populate the grid with buildings. So if you keep this at 25, it will more or less fill the whole grid most of the time. But if you keep this at something really low, like 2, it will not always be able to fill the entire grid with buildings, which can lead to natural, more natural generations, I guess. But if you have this at really high, it will take a longer time for the algorithm to populate the grid. Okay. Grid points amount is simply how many grid points, the density of the buildings which are generated. So if you keep this really low, like at 2, only a few buildings will be generated, and you kind of want to match this to the size of the road that you're going for, or perhaps the size of the grid also. So keep that at 4 maybe. And let's see here, grid noise. This will add some noise to the grid itself. So if we put that at 500, we can see that the grid itself is now noisy on the XY axis. And if you bump this up too much, it will break. And it can lead to some really wacky results. But it can be good to get some natural streets. The building length is how long the buildings will be. So the minimum is 2, which means it will go from one point to another point, and that's the length of the building. But if we keep it at, oh well, let's try 2 first. We can see here that they're all the same length and they're only more or less square or rectangular. But if we up this to, say, 12, it will be randomized between 2 and 12. So it can lead to some more interesting buildings and more interesting results overall. Okay, let's keep that at 4. The building width is the width of the actual building. So if we bump this up to 300, we can see what happens. It got a lot wider. And you can actually play around with the building width random, which will randomize the building width for each building. So now you can see that we have some, well, they're still the same size. Let's try another seed. Yeah, here we can see that we've got a pretty thin building here and thicker buildings here, and you can play around with this. The building height is obviously how tall the buildings will be. So if we put this up at like 8, for example, press build, and we'll get really tall buildings. And the same thing here, you have a randomizer which can randomize the buildings for you. So put that at 5. We can get some more interesting skylines going. And also it will always clamp to a minimum of 1. So even if we put this at random 12, the lowest buildings will always be 1 story. Okay, let's reset that. The custom data range is custom data which is given to each building, the meshes for each building. This is used within the shader to give each mesh or each building a different material within the material itself. So the range is how many channels you want. So 2 would be 0, 1, 2, so 3 channels. So maybe you have 3 materials, and each material will be distributed amongst these 3 channels. The build event on play, or build on event play, will ensure that the generator will generate the buildings when the level is loaded. Seed. This is the seed which is used to generate the city. If you find a particular seed that you like, you can always just write it down or copy it and reuse it, and it will generate the exact same city. And if you click in random seed, it will choose a random seed for you, and it will update the seed number. So you can always keep track of which seed you're on. And once you're happy with the seed, you can just untick the random seed, and it will always build, or always generate that same city. Okay, so we have the options here. You've probably seen I've been clicking on build, which just builds the city, or generates the city, and it will generate it based on the seed which you're using. You can clear the buildings at any time. Can be useful if you want to rearrange some stuff, or just increase performance, or alter the grid at some point or something. You can decrease grid points here. This is exactly the same as the grid points amount. It's just easier when you're kind of scaling up the grid. So you can decrease it, increase it. You can scale the grid down, or you can scale the grid up. So you don't have to manually drag these grid points, for example. And noteworthy here is that it will uniformly scale the whole grid based on the shape that you're using. So if you scale it up here, it will follow the shape. And Z reset it will reset the spline points, which drives the whole grid. So if you by accident move this up and you try to build it there, it will not work because it has to be a flat grid. So by pressing Z reset, it will reset the splines, and then you can just rebuild it. Okay, now let's look at single building. So a single building is a single spline which can be used. You can click on these black points here, and you can either delete them to remove them and reposition them. And if you want to add more points to your shape, you just hold down Alt and drag in the direction that you want to add. So let's just go with a simple owl building here, or maybe we can go for something like this, and it will only generate one building. Same thing here. If you change the width, it will alter the width of the single building. Some of these options are not applicable for the single building, such as the grid points amount, the grid noise, and the allowed attempts generator options. Okay, now let's take a look at the settings up here, or the properties. The cap building ends will cap the ends of each building. So if I take that in, you can see that now the ends of each building are actually capped, which can lead to some more interesting results, or depending on the look you're going for. Okay, let's just get rid of that random seed. Let's find a shorter building. Okay, curbs, these are just options for enabling or disabling certain properties of the generation. So if we remove that, we can see that the curbs are now gone. They're not no longer generated. Corner pillars, this will add corner pillars to each spline point. And it can help to hide, as you can see here, it can help to hide cornices which are built into the meshes if you're going for that option. Noteworthy here is that these are not beveled, so there is no smooth shade option for these corner meshes, corner pillars, sorry. Okay, moving on. Cornices, you can choose to have those totally disabled if you want. If you have them built into your meshes or just you don't want any, there are no more. And let's see, moving on, gutters, you can remove the gutters as well. And that will completely remove the gutters from the generated building. Balconies, if you don't want balconies or maybe you don't have balconies, you can just untick that and no balconies will spawn at all. Same thing for roof stuff. These are the chimneys or whatever you want to put on the roof. Whatever meshes you put on there, this will disable the generation of those things. Okay, moving on. Street lights, same thing there. You can just remove those if you want. Same thing with ladders. Let's see, street lights here. Yep, no street lights. Let's see, ladders. If you've got any fire ladders or anything similar in that mesh folder, they will not be generated. Okay, and same thing for signs. If you disable that, these signs will no longer generate, as seen here. Okay, and the next option is slanted roofs, and as you can see, this is not a prime example, but this roof is slanted. If you're going for a more New York look, or maybe you just want a flat roof, you can just untick that, and it will instead generate a flat roof, or a flat rooftop. And the next option is a experimental feature that I have here. It is roof tiles, and it's only applicable for a slanted roof. And it will simply generate roof tiles for your slanted roofs. The reason why it's experimental is because it doesn't always work so well with the buildings, especially on weirdly shaped buildings. The calculations are not quite good enough, but might fix that in a future update, so be careful of this one. But it works really well, especially with Nanite, in terms of triangles drawn and instancing. Okay, the roof Z offset will offset the roof, so it's only applicable for a flat roof. So here it does nothing on the slanted roof, but if we change it to a flat roof or untick the slanted roof option, we try that again, we can now see that we have offset the flat roof upward. Can be useful if you have custom cornices or just want to alter the depth of the roof slightly. Okay, the next one is the roof slanted height, and this is the height of the slanted roof. So if we put this to something ridiculous, we can see the result here, and it is basically the height of the apex point of the slanted roof. This can be randomized when you're generating multiple buildings with the roof slanted height random, which can be useful for breaking up some monotony. Okay, let's put that back. The roof offset is how much the slanted roof offsets outward. So if we put this up again to something really high, we can see the immediate results. like there. You can see that it's sticking out a lot. And as you can see here, it kind of broke the gutters because they are no longer connected to the building. Okay, moving on, we have the roof gable offset, and similarly that is only adjusting the gable offset, so which is the ends of the building, how much they're offsetting outward. This can be useful for tweaking them individually, as you don't always want the gable to offset as much as the roof. The thickness of the roof can be adjusted, so let's put this up to something really high so we can see the difference. And that is this thickness, as you can see here. And the next options are only for the roof tiles. Let's see if we can get those back in there. The roof tile cap height. The next option is the roof tile cap height, and this is the height of the board which sits on the gable. So if we put this up to something like 100, and same thing with the roof tile cap width, it's the width of the board which sits on the gable. We can see what that looks like. Yes, so it's this particular board. The next option is the roof tile offset, and this is particularly for generating the roof tile. So if you have that enabled, you can actually adjust the offset of which the tiles are laid. So it depends on the tile you're using, but if we put that to 0, there is no overlap between these tiles, which they actually should have in real life. But yeah, depending on the tile, you would want to change this or adjust it. And the roof tile scale random is just a randomizer which randomizes the scale of each individual tile which is placed, which can break up some very monotonous looking tiles, or if you're going for a more ruined look, perhaps. And the next option is also related to the tiles. It is the randomized rotation. So it will be plus minus this rotation in degrees. So if we put that to something like 15, you can see that each tile is now very very randomized. This does not look like a functioning roof at all. Okay, moving on, let's get those tiles out of there, because I'm working on my laptop, which is not so strong. We can see that we have the corner pillar width. Let's see if that's enabled. Yeah, and this will change the width of the corner pillar. So if we put this up to like 50, you can see that it will become much larger. And depending on the cornices which are inbuilt in your meshes, or however you're doing it, you might want to adjust this to make it completely hide the seams on the corners. Okay, you can, if you're using the generated cornices, you can choose to generate them on the first floor or only on the top floor. So when we turn that off, they're no longer being generated on the first floor. Now they're only being generated on the very top. If we would like to smooth shade the cornices, you just tick in this box and it will smooth shade the cornices instead of hard shade. And if we go into the world normal, we can see that they are now being smooth shaded. Okay, perfect. The next option is the Cornish Subdivisions, and this is how many times the curve is sampled. And this will up the geometry and the level detail on the cornices which are generated. So if we bump this up to something like 15, we can see that there is a lot more vertices being used and a lot more distinct shape going on here. And if we go into the wireframe mode, we can see that there are a lot more lines being rendered, or a lot more vertices being rendered. Yes. The cornice scale will adjust the scale of which the cornice is generated. So if we put that on like 150, you can see here that it is not a very big cornice. The cornice scale random is when you're generating multiple buildings, it will randomize the scale, which can add some variation. So the next options are related to the gutter, and this is the vertical gutter, so the one going from the bottom to the top, and this is how much offset it is outward. So depending on the mesh that you're using or how it is set up in your case, or how you want it to look, you can adjust it outward. You can also adjust the horizontal gutter, so the gutter which is going from the roof, if you want to adjust that. You can adjust that. Oh, sorry, we missed this one. The gutter vertical Z offset, this will adjust it up and down as well. So if we put that to like something like 150, we can definitely see that it will be sticking up. Just some fine-tuning options here. The gutter horizontal offset outward is exactly the same, but it's the gutter which is going horizontally left to right. So if you want to fine-tune those options, you can do that there. And same thing with the Z offset. If we put that up to 50, we can see that it will now be lifted up. The entrances spawn chance. So this is how many entrances can spawn per building. So if we put this at 0, let's just see here, there will be only one entrance, I believe. Yeah, one entrance. And if we put this up to something really high, like 10, it will spawn more entrances. We can see one in there, we can see 3 over here, 2 over there, 2 over there, oh, 1 over there. Yeah, so it's just how many entrances can spawn per building. The balcony start, this is at which story the balconies should start spawning. So if we put this at, let's say, 0, the balconies should start spawning at the first floor, so right above the bottom floor. They'll start spawning infinitely upwards depending on the height of your building. Okay, and the balcony star end is where the balconies should spawn. So this building is starting here, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on around the whole building. So if we put this to 0 and maybe 8, we can see that it will start from 0 and it will end at 8. So maybe south is this way, and you only want balconies facing south, for example. It's good for fine-tuning. Okay, the curb offset is how wide the curb should be, or the sidewalk, I guess. So if we put this up to something like 250, we can see that the curb is now a lot wider and not so yeah, not so thin. The curb sidewalk height is for adjusting the actual sidewalk. So this is the curb, the thing sticking up, and the sidewalk is the thing between the building and the curb. So we can adjust that to fine adjust it to maybe 20, or let's just do 25. See what happens. Now you can see the sidewalk is, well, almost protruding from the curb. So maybe you want to have a really shallow curb. We can put this down to something like 22.5 maybe. Build that, and now you have a extremely shallow curb. The curb scale is how big the actual curb should be. So if we build that, you can see that the curve is now a lot higher. And this can also be adjusted within the curve which is used to generate the curb. The width, for example. We'll go into that later. And same thing with the subdivisions, similar to the cornices. You can change how many times the curve is sampled. So if we put that up to 15, not much is going to happen because this curve is a really the curve is a really simple one. But more geometry is being used to generate the curve itself. You can also smooth shade the curve if you want to do that. Let's just double check here in the world normal. Yeah, that is being smooth shaded. If you're going for a more realistic look. The next option is the roof stuff amount, and this is how much stuff will be generated on the roofs of the buildings, and this is clamped to the amount of spline points divided by 2, or the building length, I guess you could say. So if we pop this up to something like 3, you can now see that there will be 3 chimneys. If we bump up to 4, be 4 chimneys, but if we bump this up to 5, it will be clamped at the length of the building. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the scale of which the roof stuff are, you can globally scale those. So if you want, if you by accident made really big chimneys, or the buildings which you're using are really small, you can change the scale there. The ladders can be adjusted. If you pump this up to 5, more ladders will be spawning per building. Fire ladders, that is. As you can see here. This is same thing with the entrances. This is a spawn rate, so it's not guaranteed that you get exactly 5 when you type in 5. The next option is the signs how many, and this is a spawn rate at which the signs spawn. So let's change up the building a little bit so we can see both sides a little bit better. If we put this at something like 10, a lot of signs will be spawning, as you can see here. This is of course clamped based on the building, so they won't spawn on each other. And the last option in the properties is remove some streetlights, and this will remove some of the streetlights which are being spawned, because they will spawn at each spline point. So this building has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spline points, so 6 streetlights will spawn normally, but if you remove some, they will be randomly removed. So you can add more variation or less monotony. So here you can see all 6 are being spawned. Yes, moving on. Let's just see, let's get a good seat here before we proceed. Okay, the meshes. The first option here is keep all mesh sets together, and this will only generate buildings with the same mesh sets. So we have the bottom meshes, we have the entrances, we have the mid balcony, top. So if this option is enabled, only the first mesh in each of these arrays will spawn. But if you disable this, they will mix. The only exception is the entrances and the bot meshes will always be kept together, same thing as the mid and mid balcony, because they are connected. So as you can see here, we now have a different bot mesh and a different mid mesh and a, well, that is the same top mesh. So that brings me to my next option, which is the separate top mesh, and this will also separate the top mesh from the rest of the family. So if we randomize the seed, we can see that we are getting top meshes which are not belonging to that family or that set of meshes. Okay, and here is where you should place your meshes. The meshes have to be the same width. All of them have to be the same width. That is the only requirement. Otherwise you can go crazy and add whatever you want here and it will generate. The gutters vertical, this is where you put the vertical gutters. As you can see, it's using there. Let's remove that corner pillar real quick. Yes, so that is the vertical gutter which I am using. And the horizontal gutters, this would be these. The gutter hats, which is just a mesh which is placed on top of the vertical gutter to give it a better shape and make it look more proportionate. The roof tiles is the tiles which are generated, and the roof apex tiles are the tiles which are, wait, let me just show you real quick. It is the tiles which are drawn from the apex points. These are the apex tiles, and these are the regular tiles. Okay. And the ladders are the ladders which are used, the fire ladders or fire escape ladders. Let's see if this building has one yet. So you can put whatever you want in there. Just kind of make sure that they have a similar height to the meshes which are being used. You can put anything in here really. It's up to you. It will generate that for you. The roof stuff, you can put whatever you want in there and it will generate them on the roof. So I have some placeholder meshes here, some power poles and some antennas and chimneys. I think there's some water towers and stuff which are more suited for the flat roofs and that sort of stuff. Signs, generate the signs. You can also put anything in here. Streetlights, same with the streetlights. I only have one placeholder for now. Okay, the materials, let's get into that. These are the materials for the procedural meshes which are generated within the generator. So that would be anything which you do not place in the mesh folder. So the cap end material is the material which is being used for this part of the building, the capped buildings. The roof material would be the roof which is underneath the tiles, and the roof cap material would be this. On a slanted roof, we're capping the gable of the roof. And the roof tile cap material would be the actual board which caps the tiles on the roof. So this material. We have the curb material, which is the material which will be used for the actual curb, which is protruding here. And the sidewalk material, which is the material between the building and the curb. The corner pillar material, which is the corner pillar. Let me just activate that again. Let's see. Yeah, so the material which will be used for the corner pillar. And finally, the cornice material, which is this. And that is the same material for the top cornice and the bottom cornice. Okay, so now let's just take a look at the curves. We have the curve and the cornice curve. You can add however many curves you want in each of these categories and it will randomize for each building. And this is the profile of the cornice or the curb. And to adjust these, you just double click on the curve you want to look at, for example. And let's look at the cornice in this case. You only want to adjust the Z. The easiest thing to do is just to copy the placeholder curves which are in the curve folder and make adjustments there. So you can make whatever profile you want by simply moving the points around. And let's say we want a really spiky cornice here. Just do something like that, and let's regenerate that, and you can see that it is trying to sample. But the problem here is that it doesn't have enough subdivisions in order to sample the curve correctly. So if we increase the Cornish subdivision to something like 15 maybe, we can see that it will now more or less sample the curve. And you can do some really complex shapes here, and it will try to accommodate the shape which is given. And we can also, of course, add the smooth shading if it's a really high subdivision to help smooth out the rounded shapes. Okay, and now I just want to quickly go through how the shader works, or the materials which are included in this package. And we are using a triplanar shader in order to texture these procedural meshes. And that is due to the nature of the UV unwrapping method which I am using. It is actually unwrapping per face, which is not ideal for complex objects such as this cornice. So triplanar will work best. Regular UV mapping will work for flat surfaces such as the sidewalk or perhaps the roof. But try to stick to triplanar. And to utilize the custom data, I have included a function which we can see here. It's called the MFPBR switch, and it is triplanar based, and it basically takes in a custom data value which then distributes a material to each building based on its custom data. So if you would like to have more materials, more than 3 materials, I guess, you can just simply copy and paste these nodes, and it should be pretty straightforward. But 3 are included here. There is also a material function which is part of the PBR switch, but it's a switch on int which can be used here. So if we just type switch on int, we can get it there, and here you can plug in the custom data per instance custom data, and here you can plug in whatever you want, so based on the custom data value of each building, it will change whatever you plug in here. This can just be plugged into anything, so put in the base color. You can pop in some colors here, for example, and it will change based on the custom data which is distributed to the building. Okay, that kind of wraps it up. Thank you so much for taking the time and watching this video. This product is available on the Unreal Marketplace, and if you have any questions, just send me a message or leave a comment. Yeah, thanks again.